Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. And well, let's just get right to it, man. I'm going to introduce he's not really my special co-pilot for the week. He's going to be off and on my regular co-pilot here on the Tim May Podcast for the 2022 season, which promises to be possibly a great one for Ohio State. But ladies and gentlemen, Spencer Holbrook, as I refer to him most often, Glue Man. Spencer Holbrook, welcome to the Tim May Podcast again, my man.
Tim, just glad that you can have me in the cockpit co-piloting this fantastic flying machine.
Well, as I used to tell my other co-pilot, keep your hands off the controls unless I tell you. And please don't push any buttons like my grandsons do. But I digress. Hey, bottom line, let's get right into it. I've got an interesting show, I think, today, again, because I also have as my special guest Dennis Dodd of CBSSports.com. We're going to talk about Big Ten expansion. Is it over? And we're also going to talk a little bit about the Buckeyes. And, he's a guy with his eyes on the national scene, much like my guest last week, Bill Bender, has his eyes on the national scene and where Ohio State and Alabama fit into that. This collision course they seem to be on. But because when we talk about Ohio State football, we are talking about the national scene. But before I get to that, we've been going to all these press conferences, watching a little bit of practice when we can, a full practice when we got the opportunity. What do you think is the question Ohio State has answered the most in this preseason camp, or at least that you're satisfied with the answer you're going to see on September the 3rd?
Tim, I think it's got to be, and of course the entire offseason has been dominated by the defensive side of the ball. I think the biggest thing that I've had answered maybe is just the fact that this defense is ready to go. And Jim Knowles has got, like he said on Monday, 75% of this thing installed. I don't know if they're going to get much higher than that because he always likes to have a little bit of that wiggle room, as we talked about earlier on yesterday on the practice report. I just think that when you look at the way that this offense is set up, there's not really a lot of questions other than maybe on the offensive line. And so you can kind of shift your eyes to the defense and is it ready to play against Notre Dame? Is it ready to take on a top 5 offense, an offensive line that is respected by everyone in the country? And the answer so far has been a resounding yes. Now that's still, Ryan Day's favorite saying this preseason has been the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
And that's going to be some fun pudding on September 3rd. So we'll just see how it plays out. But I do think this defense is just ready to roll. And that was my biggest question coming in is it going to be, they're going to go out there and play regardless, but is it going to be ready? The answer so far, it looks like yes.
You think Ryan Day's angling for an NIL agreement with Jell-O pudding pops? I mean, what's your guess on that?
I don't know. Maybe is he a vanilla pudding or a chocolate pudding guy?
I don't know. I think he probably a Neapolitan, if in fact there is one, but he does. I mean, Tim May uses that term "proof is in the pudding" also a lot because, like I said, the jury's got to still be out on this defense until, like you say, you see them do it against a true opponent, and they're getting a true opponent in that September 3rd opener. But you know what? Let's just move on real quickly to my conversation with Dennis Dodd. Like I said, about whether the Big Ten is through expanding. He thinks it's not. He thinks it's headed to 20. I'm giving away a little bit of the goods there. But I kind of a little bit skeptical about that. And we also talk about the Ohio State, where it fits in the national scene, which is right up there in one of those top 2 spots with Alabama going into the 2022 season. That's easier for me to say. But without any further ado, let's get to my conversation with Dennis Dodd. And as always, man, I'm really pleased to welcome in my next guest, Dennis Dodd from CBSSports.com. And Dennis stays on top of everything, as I was telling you earlier, has been doing it for decades. Isn't that right, Dennis?
Yeah, sadly, that's true. I don't know about doing it right for decades, but I've been around decades. Yeah.
Yes, you've been around for decades, ladies and gentlemen. He even has a home away from home. That's what I like about Dennis Dodd. That's a success he is. But Dennis, I just wanted to jump right in with you, man. I mean, the Big Ten obviously announced its record breaking. Is that the right word? Media rights deal. Huh? Yeah. But starting in 2023 next year and stuff with CBS, NBC, and of course Fox. And I don't know, is just from stuff we've been seeing around, stuff I've been reading from you, et cetera, but also you're hearing from some reputable sources. they may not be done yet, that ESPN might still be in the picture in the final analysis? What kind of update people on what you think here as we talk the end of last week?
Yeah, I do think they're going to make a concerted effort to expand. I don't think I'd be, go out there and say they are going to expand, because I don't know if anybody can predict that. But
Yeah,
Kevin Warren has left enough breadcrumbs around these last couple of months that you kind of get a picture of what he wants to do. I think he wants to expand. I think he wants to establish a West Wing on the West Coast with USC and UCLA and maybe 2 or 4 more from the Pac-12, and then go to his presidents and say, look, we can put together the best academic and athletic conference there has ever been if we do this, because it's going to be a tough haul.
yeah,
The other part of that is maybe not so tough. The presidents, I think there's 5 or 6 presidents in the Big Ten that have West Coast Pac-12 degrees, so there's something to be said for that. But when he dropped a little crumb with me on Tuesday, I talked to him before the contract came out, the deal came out, and he said that ESPN might still be in this because we're all writing them off, right?
yeah,
Just the first time in 40 years they don't have a relationship. Well, think about this, Tim. The contract's done. The windows are done. The exclusivity with those 3 networks, they know what they're getting. The only
right.
thing left is the draft of the games. If there's any extra tonnage or inventory, somebody has to show it and somebody has to pay for it. And so that would be, ESPN would be that add-on at a discounted price, because I don't think they, obviously they wouldn't have to pay as much as the other rights holders because they're not getting as many games. But even to that point where there was pushback when those 4 schools were first mentioned, Cal, Stanford, Oregon, and Washington, because they didn't bring equal value to a USC or UCLA, which we now know is like $80 million a year.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't really matter now. If ESPN's paying for that, everybody's still making money. So
Yeah.
I dare say I think that will happen. Don't hold me to it, but I think that's where this thing is headed. I think it's headed towards a 20-team Big Ten.
Yeah. Yeah, I literally don't think things are over. But the flip side of that is,
No.
I had reputable people telling me that when this deal that was announced last week was being done, that finally those people that were involved, meaning the networks that were involved, were saying, "Well, hey, you may add 2 more teams, but this is the pie. This is the pie you're going to get." Right? You know what I mean? That was the ultimate size of the pie. So if you had 2 or 4 more, without adding, of course, the biggest plum left on the tree, which is Notre Dame, your slices are going to be smaller from that pie because this is what we can afford. This is what we project, etc. That was not taking into account, like you said, a 4th member coming into the deal, which would be ESPN, which could sweeten that pie to a certain extent, which is kind of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I think those four schools would come in at a discounted rate because they've been told they don't bring pro rata.
Right.
And if your choice is between, what may be a crumbling Pac-12 that you're not going to sign a grant of rights for anyway, and the security of the Big Ten at a lower number, a lower payout than the other 16 members, I think I know what I would do.
Yeah.
And let me say this, there's some historical perspective to this. In 2016, the Big 12 tried to do this. They had a clause in their contract, a composition clause in their contract. The Big 10 apparently has the same sort of clause. Back in 2016, the number with ESPN, or the clause with ESPN, said the Big 12 could expand by, I think, as many as 4 members, maybe more, but they would get, I think the number was $1 billion, $250 million each for the rest of the contract. Didn't matter who they were.
Yeah.
How about that? And it ended up being basically the 4 that you see now in the Big 12: Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, and what was the 4th? It was those 4 that were basically being considered. And part of the reason they didn't expand is the Big 12 didn't want to piss off ESPN and exercise that clause, which would have been $1 billion. They acted in good faith. Well, look where that got them. Texas and Oklahoma left, and that was that.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to determine here, and the Big Ten has it too, these composition clauses, I think they're all boilerplate in all these deals. This is not exclusive to the Big Ten. There's escalator clause. Well, no, if you're a smart lawyer for a conference, you put in there, okay, but wait a minute, if we at any point decide to add teams, here's what it's going to cost, or what has to happen for it to come about. So I
Yeah.
don't think that's a huge piece of news for the Big Ten, but there is some historical perspective there.
Yeah, there's a certain value in adding inventory. That's what they call it anymore, game inventory to the stockpile. And you're exactly right. It's funny though. I'm going to run the little clip I had later in my podcast here, but I asked Gene Smith about, when you look at all of this, Ohio State is worth so much more on the shelf. You know what I mean? If you want to talk inventory, Ohio State, probably Michigan, Penn State, Michigan State, or some of these schools. But if you look at Ohio State's fan base, I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Darren White out of Samford University, just talking about the fan base that Ohio State has, which is the largest in the country, a bona fide fan base. Alabama second, but by almost 2 million people fewer. But the point is, why wouldn't, when you're negotiating, why wouldn't Ohio State be worth more? Why wouldn't Ohio State get a bigger share of the pie, than the others? You know what I mean? And like, Gene basically doesn't want to go that route because he went that route as an athletic director at Iowa State when he was in the Big 12 and felt like, they got short shrift. But Ohio State, Alabama, they are worth more to the league, aren't they? To each league than maybe some of the others. Just what's your thought on that?
Yeah, they are, but you have to have a dance partner.
Yeah, exactly.
They are, but does Ohio State want to go independent and exercise that? No, that doesn't make sense. Despite leaving money on the table for decades, Notre Dame is going to stay independent. But no, you need a dance partner. It's the combination of games. It's not just Ohio State. It's Ohio State, Michigan. It's Ohio State, Michigan State. It's now Ohio State, USC, UCLA. It's Ohio State, Wisconsin, Iowa. That's what gives it the value. And the fact that the Big Ten still has a quarter of the U.S. population in its footprint. And now if you throw in LA and maybe more of the West Coast, those big cities, Seattle, Portland, it's going to be more than that. So you can see, you can almost see what's happening here. It's an attempt to conquer the world.
Yeah.
And with Kevin Warren calling the shots, and we saw that, I don't know if you saw it, but the transcript from HBO Real Sports on Friday, where Kevin Warren told Brian Gumbel, we want to go to 20 teams, and I think it's worth looking at paying players.
Yeah.
So that you can see where this is headed. The first one to pay players, or the first conference to do revenue sharing, has a tremendous advantage in recruiting this through. I give him credit.
Yeah. Flip side of it is Gene Smith, one of the major domos in the Big Ten, as far as, calling the shots, and basically is in essence, I think basically it's not thinking they're going to be expanding anytime soon past the 16. And number two, that will basically, he is not for the pay players kind of aspect of things.
Yeah.
As he said, when we get to that, I'm out. Meaning,
right.
You're forgetting about the value added that these players enjoy, other than tuition, room, board, and books for their playing. All the training, even the mental health aspect of things. He went through the litany of things. There's a fine line there, because obviously the quarterback for Ohio State had said earlier in the day, CJ Stroud, about how, you got to know what you're worth, and players are worth something in this thing. It's just we're in an interesting time here, where finally, after like decades of talking about these kind of things, though, some of these things can come true, right, Dennis? They're already coming true.
Yeah. Yeah. Gene's right. And I respect his opinion, but we've been paying players for years now. The cost of attendance would not go to athletes if they weren't athletes. The Alston money, $6,000 a year, goes only to athletes.
By the way, Ohio State's going to pay the maximum there. Yeah. They've budgeted $6 million for that. Go ahead, though.
And as I've said, if that's true, and it is, the average person on the street doesn't consider that, I don't think. No. Then all we're talking about is the number of zeros at the end of the check. How much? Okay, if we're going to talk about that, how much is too much?
Yeah.
Is Will Anderson driving a Porsche at Alabama? Is that too much? Well, no. It's according to the rules, it's absolutely allowed. Now we can have another discussion about how the NCAA let it get to be that way. But look, they're being compensated, and my end point in all this is it hasn't changed the games.
No.
People still fill stadiums. The shoe is filled. It hasn't turned off fans, and it won't turn off fans.
Yeah. Now the transfer portal is having more of an when you couple the transfer portal with the NIL, now you really got something going on, et cetera. The transfer portal, in my opinion, has always been the more transformative thing that's going on here more than anything else, because then when you get the NIL involved, it's crazy what's coming down the road, and I don't think they can really get a handle on it. I keep reminding people NIL is law now. We're not talking about NCAA rules, and
Right.
you can't put laws back in the book, so to speak. Hey, real quick though, while I got you, does your crystal ball see 20 teams in the Big Ten within the next 8 years? What does your crystal ball show?
Oh, I think it might happen in the next few months or weeks.
But you know where I'm going with that.
Kinda,
so you say that. So who in your mind is the candidate or the candidates?
well, those right now, those four. I think Notre Dame is staying put as an independent. I think those four are being targeted. There's no one else on the board. There's no one else available.
Yeah.
Oregon and Washington are the two best football brands, quote unquote, available, because they are in the process of negotiating a contract with the Big 12. They're out for bid.
Yeah.
We can talk about Florida State, Clemson, and Miami in the ACC, but they have a grant of rights for 14 more years in the ACC. So they're not right now available. They could be in a huge legal fight. I don't think there's anywhere else that the Big Ten can go. I mean, look, where we're talking about with those four, I just said, they're undervalued. They're not going to bring $80 million a year. But if it gets ESPN's nose under the tent and they want to be there, because look, ESPN's going to be showing not only Oregon, but Oregon, Ohio State at some point. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
At some point, and for a discounted rate. So I mean, to me, that those are the only players left on the board.
And even at that discounted rate, they're going to be making more money they'd be making with the Pac-12 anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. That was priced at the 10 existing teams. Tim, I'll tell you real quick. Without USC and UCLA, lost about 40% of their value, to the point that very optimistically they were worth $300 million a year. So that's $30 million per school, and I was told that was very optimistic. It was more like the 20s.
Wow.
So give me a number. They're going to be making a lot more in the Big Ten.
Wow. Dennis, you're a college football fan. I mean, you don't cover it as passionately without. Is what's happening good for college football, that the Pac-12 can basically almost, in essence, float away? I mean, in a lot of, in terms of like importance, et cetera. Is it good that the Big 12, is still in this flux, et cetera? I mean, well, what's your take on it, man? Because these are still universities that have played football for a long time and have contributed, like you said, to the growth of the game, et cetera. But do you like what's going on with an SEC Big 10 dominated world?
Yeah, I'm kind of agnostic in it. It just is. I think there's a separate discussion, because realignment doesn't stop at the top, SEC and Big 10. I think there's a discussion to be had below that. Obviously, the Big 12 and Pac-12 right now is everything we've seen in the last 10 years. But to me, it just is what it is now. And it's not unlike your local bank changing hands 5 times in 10 years, because banks are consolidating. We know that. That's just business. That's economics.
Yeah.
And maybe that's all this is. But when you get to the top with the SEC and Big 10, it's more than a coincidence. I will tell you that there are the same number of teams in those conferences beginning in 24 than there are in the NFL, 32.
Yeah.
Same number. That comparison has been made. So beyond having all the power and the money and everything else, I think there's still, because it's college, there's going to be a stewardship aspect and a responsibility aspect to the whole thing. Where does that money go? Again, we just talked about how much can you make before the athlete doesn't share in that, and they will. I think they will.
Yeah.
I don't think these people can look at themselves in the mirror and not share it with the athletes now. Medical care beyond eligibility, number of games played, because I think that we could do a whole show. The next thing is the playoffs going to expand. I think it's going to expand pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a big number. Yeah. Asking players to play 16, 17 games.
Yeah. And
So
at
that
that
has to
level,
be addressed.
at that
That,
level of game,
and
I
that
mean,
stuff,
that's,
yeah.
yeah,
And
it's not,
we're
it's not
talking
Ohio State,
about,
Arkansas State. You know what I mean? It's at that level.
no, it's elite athletes.
Yeah.
And we're talking about uh, things that are collectively bargained in the pros. Oh, you want to add playoff games and playoff teams? Go, sure. 17 games, sure. That's a huge mountain to climb in college.
Do you think it will start? Do you think paying players eventually will start with at least giving them bonuses for playing in college football playoff games? You understand what I'm saying? Isn't
Yeah,
that sort of the foot in the door?
yeah, yeah. If it's not revenue sharing, which is I think the way Kevin Warren wants to go
Yeah.
initially, because you may have some Title IX issues there.
Right.
Um, but I think you could, for lack of a better term, you just mentioned it. I think you could pay players appearance fees for the playoff or to play in bowl games. Frankly, I know there's been some talk among the bowls about that. What they could give players to make sure they show up. This all started a few years ago with Christian McCaffrey and the running back from LSU.
Oh,
Both
yeah,
remember that they both
yeah,
opted,
yeah,
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 they both opted out, and people lost their minds. I think they were both injured at the time. They were both going to be high draft picks. What other decision would you or I have made?
yeah.
I mean, for a bowl game, even a January 1st bowl game, to ruin a career where you could make 60, 80, $100 million. So that kind of hit it off. Now
Yeah.
others have done it. I think after I saw Jameson Williams go down in that in the playoff game against Georgia, the receiver from Alabama, I started thinking in the back of my head, how soon do these guys start skipping playoff games?
Yeah.
Because again, I know they're wanting to play for it all, but the balance, if this have to be absolutely top guys,
Yeah.
the balance is, well, you're going to get a $60 million handed to you in 2 months as a first round draft choice. What do you want to do? And there's insurance, there's loss of draft value, but that doesn't provide very much. I think that's coming. And then that's why I think you're going to see appearance fees.
But when you start skipping games, where do you stop? I mean, because every game's jeopardy. Every time you put the helmet on, it's jeopardy big time. I mean, Ohio State had a running back, Evan Pryor, go down. The second week of practice. I mean, this guy was going to have they were planning stuff for that. You understand what I'm saying there? It's like Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson skipped the Rose Bowl last year, and Ohio State still had one of the most fantastic games you've ever seen, et cetera. And let's say they paid them $50,000 to play in the Rose Bowl, that wouldn't have gotten them to stay because they were both high first round draft.
No, it wouldn't.
It's
I hate to mention the E word, but what gets them on the field? They're employees.
Yeah.
And I know that's the biggest step and one a lot of people don't want to consider. But if you're an employee, or even if it's collectively bargained, there's still a lot of lawyers that tell me you could collectively bargain stuff like that and they wouldn't be employees.
Yeah.
But yeah, $50,000 isn't going to keep Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave in the Rose Bowl. You're right.
Yeah, and you just hit the nail on the head, though, by the way, before I move on to my last couple of questions. The nail on the head is if you start paying these guys, you literally probably have to have them under quote contract, end quote. They will be working for you. And number two, that would be a way to get a handle on the transfer portal and things like that. But do we really want NFL light? I mean, do we really, really, truly, even fans, do we really want that?
There's still an innocence, I think, in college that exists, even with everything we have today with NIL. And again, I think that's where this comes. Collective bargaining solves the issue with the transfer portal and NIL. I think you collectively bargain it. I'll give you X in return for this. For 2 years at our school, let's say 2 years, you agree to stay for 2 years unless you're abused or something like that. Then we give you X. I think that's fair. That doesn't. From when this started in the 80s, I started considering this. Like, what's the threshold where fans are turned off and people turn off their televisions?
Yeah.
I think it's a big one, Tim.
Yeah.
I think they'd accept it.
But I always say this before I ask you my last thing. I always say this, though. You can put most of the players that are on Ohio State's roster right now, and if there wasn't all the ballyhoo about recruiting them and all the publicity they get from guys like us, et cetera, going through the mill, et cetera, you could put them in orange and green uniforms and they'd play at Columbus Crew Stadium. They might draw 5,000 people. There's something to be said literally when college football for the uniform you're wearing and like you said, the tradition, et cetera. that has been built through the years that has helped make you an important dude, right? I mean, it's kind of like chicken
Yeah.
or egg a little bit, isn't it?
That is the eternal question, one raised by Jim Delaney many years back when
Yeah.
I think it was the Johnny Manziel thing with autographs. He said it's still the name on the front of the jersey is still more valuable than the name on the back of the jersey. And
Yeah.
that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but it is a point to be made. The other point is, well, they would be playing somewhere. Does the brand make the player or does the player make the brand? I think
Yeah.
that's the eternal question. It probably won't go away.
Yeah, but I just look at all these guys, these almost nameless guys in minor league baseball. You know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
hoping to get a shot, and they're not setting. I mean, they may be setting Durham Bulls records, but that doesn't mean anything. You understand what I'm saying? It's just
Yeah.
to me, it's really interesting because the guys of the past helped pave the way, and I'm not advocating going back and paying those guys, what they're, but it's just an interesting time we're in. Hey, last thing before I let you go, because I know you got to get going. You're at Arizona State trying to beat the heat. Ohio State, Alabama. I had Bill Bender from the Sporting News on last week. Ohio State and Alabama on a collision course. What is your take here a week and a half before the jump off of the 2022 season? What's your take on what's coming down the pike?
Put Georgia in there too, because there's that much separation. And as we've learned a couple of times, you can still lose the SEC championship game and play for it all.
Yeah.
So I'm really high on Georgia, actually, as well as the other two. They're the two best. But if you really sit down and look at Georgia, I think they've got a chance to get back. It's those three, and then who's number four? Because I counted it up. Those three schools have played in 33 playoff games and have won 7 of the 8 college football playoff championships. LSU won the other. Yeah. So what are we talking about? I mean, so it's just, you can't be wrong. Pick a fourth team. I don't know, but I think that's the number one question going into the season. Look, you get into a playoff, anything can happen. Yes, this is Ohio State's best team since 2019, maybe the one that should have won it all.
Yeah.
Alabama, they knew this was going to be good in 22. They were telling me in 20, you better get us now because we're going to be good in 22. Well, they lose 6 first-round draft choices and come within 10 minutes of winning a championship again.
Yeah,
they're loaded this year. So yeah, that would be the obvious matchup in the championship game. And maybe part of that is I've never seen it like this. The same old teams are in it, but I'll take those three against the field. I don't think anybody else has a chance of winning it.
And what are you most curious about learning about Ohio State in that Notre Dame game? Obviously, everybody wants to know if they fixed their defense. I guess we're going to find out, but that may be your answer. But what are you most curious, or do you have a sense that Ohio State is going to be back in that realm from a defensive standpoint? Just go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I definitely do. I love Jim Knowles, and that was my question. What are they going to look like defensively? I think they're going to be a lot better. They won the Rose Bowl, but there's a bad taste in some people's mouths defensively.
Yeah,
they're more talented than that team was defensively, and so and again, prohibitive favorites against Notre Dame. A great matchup, but look, Notre Dame's not ready for prime time yet. I don't think.
Yeah,
especially at Ohio State. This isn't going to be Oregon walking in there and bullying the Buckeyes. So I want to see how good this defense can get because I think it's going to be a lot better.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dennis Dodd from CBSSports.com. Dennis Dodd, thank you very much for joining the Tim May podcast again, my man.
It's an honor.
What do you think, Spence? You think the Big Ten is going to head to 20 teams before this whole thing is over? Like Dennis Dodd said, he could see a whole West Wing there. I don't know if they'd make Martin Sheen the sub commissioner in the West Wing, but he could see them adding at least 2 more teams from that Pac-12 or what's left of the Pac-12. But what does your crystal ball tell you, my man?
I don't know if it's going to get to 20, Tim, but I could see them adding a couple more teams. But the question that Kevin Warren has to ask himself, and that these conference, heavyweights, the athletic directors of the league have to ask themselves is, what exactly are they going to gain from some of these schools joining the league? Unless a school can provide, enough proof that they can bring in that they are worthy of $100 million a year, there's not really a reason to bring them in. Like, if you were to start all this over, you're not going to add Illinois and Purdue again. Those schools don't bring in $100 million. So why are you going to go out and add, Virginia or Virginia Tech, knowing that those two schools don't bring in the type of fan bases and revenue that amount up to $100 million? Maybe there's two or three. If you look at Stanford with the way that their endowment is and the prestigiousness of having Stanford in the league, maybe that's worth it. Notre Dame obviously is the clear-cut choice. Oregon and Washington are two nationally known programs up there in the Pacific Northwest that just allow you to further expand that footprint. Maybe Clemson and Florida State if the ACC decides that it's done being what it is, or if those schools get fed up. But there's not really a lot of options out there of schools that will truly add value to what the league wants to be. And so if you're adding anything less than that, whatever the number is, whether it's 100 million or 80 million, if you're adding anything less than that, I don't see a reason for the Big Ten to bring another school in. And so if it does expand further, I just think it's going to be absolute heavyweights. You're not going to see, a Kansas or a Virginia or maybe even a North Carolina, because basketball only goes so far. I just don't know if it's worth it to bring those kind of schools in unless it's Notre Dame, Oregon, Stanford, and Washington.
Yeah, as Dennis pointed out too, you heard him in that conversation. Maybe they would take a couple of members on the idea, a couple of other members on the idea that they wouldn't get that huge share like the rest of them. And like I pointed out, even from the Pac-12, you get a couple of teams still from out there, even a lesser number. If in fact a lesser number would still give them a bigger share than what they're going to be getting out of that paltry Pac-12 television package, a broadcast package, which is, really is kind of a shame the way things have gone out there in a lot of respects. And like he also pointed out, ESPN might not be totally out of the picture from the standpoint of it might look favorably on being able to add a couple more teams and then maybe jump into that inventory package of doing some games, both football and basketball. It all remains to be seen. I personally think that's a little over the top. I think you're right. I think the number right now, barring getting Notre Dame and one other team, is about where they'd like it to be. And as the television folks told the Big Ten when they were doing this new package, which was much ballyhooed a week ago, the pie is the pie. Now, if you decide to add two more people to the table, the slices are still going to be the slices are going to come out of that same size pie, which means your slice is going to get smaller probably. So, who knows where it's going. I did ask this, though. After we got to talk to Gene Smith the other day, I pulled him aside and I asked him, when you consider what, like you were just talking about, what teams are worth, isn't Ohio State worth a hell of a lot more to the Big Ten than some of these other teams? And shouldn't it get, from a standpoint of an attractiveness standpoint of drawing eyeballs to the television screens, shouldn't it in that realm get a bigger slice of the pie? And here's the way he responded.
No, we're not going to change our revenue share model.
Yeah.
We're not. We look at some different things on helping schools manage expenditures better. Yeah, but we're not going to change the revenue model. I mean, we need everyone in the league to be strong, and financial support provides that opportunity. So, yeah.
Gene Smith has always been, in my opinion, a good member of the club, meaning he's part about being an equal member in the Big Ten, not throwing his weight around if you don't have to. I'm talking about just his opinions, et cetera. And I think he's thrown his weight around more than ever in the last year or so. But with that said, he just believes if you're in a conference, everybody deserves an equal share. And I can see where he's going there, but like I just keep coming back to Spence, Ohio State lights up those ratings when it's on a television package, and like Dennis Dodd, I brought that up to Dennis Dodd and he said, well, they still need someone to play. And I go, yeah, but Ohio State versus Purdue is going to get you a bigger number from a rating standpoint than Indiana versus Purdue. You follow my drift? And I don't know where you come down on that. Where do you come down on that?
Well, Tim, I heard something, I think it was a couple of years ago now, that I've almost lived by when it comes to conference realignment. There's a lot of folks that want to talk about these super leagues, 35-team super league with the best of the SEC and the best of the Big Ten. Well, I got a news flash for you. If Ohio State and the 7 other best teams in college football are all in an 8-team league. Somebody's going 1-7.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to lose.
Oh, yeah.
So,
No, I've been reminding people of that all along. You think you want this, but do you really want this?
So, if the Penn States and the Michigans and the Oregons of the world are ready to go 5-7 every year, then sure, let's get a 30-team super conference together and just do this thing. But all of that is to say, it's a roundabout way of saying, I don't think Illinois is worth the $80 million, whatever, but they're worth that extra $20 million to take the 9 losses a year when Ohio State and Michigan and Penn, and that's a terrible way to look at it. But these conferences, there's a Vanderbilt in every conference. There's an Illinois and an Indiana in every conference. And
yes.
So equal revenue sharing kind of just makes up for that. It allows them to, quote, stay competitive while they also take those losses because Ohio State's got a national title to try to win.
Yeah.
So,
there's a Vanderbilt in every NFL, in every NFL conference also, if you follow my drift. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like there are haves and have-nots, et cetera. I see what you're saying. Hey, I want to move on real quick. Just get to the final question here I wanted to ask you before we get out of here. I asked you a while ago what question got answered in preseason camp to your liking. What's a question Ohio State is still dealing with now, a week and a half before the season opener against Notre Dame, that I don't know, that you still need to see a clear answer to? And obviously you've already said the defense, the proof is going to be in the pudding, but you got a sense that this defense is going to be better than it was a year ago. You just have that sense, right? So what is there a question still lingering in your mind?
I think it's more of a broad question, Tim, and I don't mean to beat around the question, but because I know you want hard, fast, journalistic, very good answers here.
Opinion.
I know who you are, Tim, but I think that my biggest question will not be answered until maybe even a few weeks after September 3rd. I want to know if this truly is, and I know Dennis talked about this a little bit, is this truly Ohio State, Alabama, and everyone else, or is Ohio State going to have to scratch tooth and nail to try to get to Alabama? Because that's the dragon that Ryan Day has to slay. He's beaten Michigan. I know it didn't beat him the last time. He's won a college football playoff game. He got to that national title game and got, beaten badly by Nick Saban. That's the last dragon that Ryan Day needs to slay, and Ohio State needs to get off their back because it's been almost a decade now. So I just want to know, is this truly the collision course? Because we know Alabama's going to be good. Last year was a rebuilding year, according to Nick Saban. They almost won the whole damn thing. And so, with Bryce Young back, with Willie Anderson back, with the wide receivers they brought in from the portal, with the running backs they brought in from the portal, that looks like the number 1 team in the country. We've talked about Ohio State before going in as number 2 in the country, right behind the Crimson Tide, and then not living up to that. Can this Ohio State team push itself for 15 straight weeks or 14 or however long it is until the end of November and the end of December to get to that point where the semifinals aren't really a formality, but you get the idea that this is going to be those 2 schools? And if Ohio State comes out and sets the tone against Notre Dame and then follows that up 3 weeks later with a really good effort against Wisconsin, and then can do that against Iowa and stacks those games together, goes to Happy Valley, you're going to get the sense that it is that collision course. It all starts in 2 weeks, though, and it, like I said, it will set the tone. Is this truly going to be 1 versus 2 down, throughout the entire season, or is this going to be one of those Ohio State seasons that you're sweating out some of those games?
That's funny. I just want to know who the third receiver is going to be when they run out there.
Well,
after Jackson Smith and Jigba and Marvin Harrison Jr., is it going to be Emeka Egbuka? Is it going to be Julian Fleming? Is that Alba Camp? I don't know. You took that Hubble Space Telescope and took a picture of a nebula far, far away, and are trying to interpret it. I understand where you're going, man. I mean, great expectations. And Ryan Day, boy, I don't know if he'd have it any other way, but he totally understands what's up. He totally understands. That's what people are almost looking at the end of this thing before they even enjoy the beginning of it. And that's a bad way to live your life, by the way, if in fact you're doing that. But it is interesting that, yes, this seems like one of those years. And just like Alabama and Nick Saban indicated, last year was a rebuilding year. when you look at what Ohio State went through on defense last year, not just the scheme and stuff, but so many young new players playing regular roles, clearly was a rebuilding year. Clearly a first-year starting quarterback, a freshman becoming your number one running back as that season progressed. Travion Henderson, I'm talking about. C.J. Stroud before that. That was a rebuilding year for Ohio State also. And it's interesting now, though, that people have picked the usual suspects, including Georgia, to make a run, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's just the way college football is now. It's very I'm not preaching anything new, but it's top heavy, and it's going to be top heavy as long as we can think about the sport being what it is right now. And so I'm still looking at those usual suspects. I won't give a playoff prediction here, but I'm still looking at the usual suspects, and you can name them right off the top of your right off the top of your head. Who
the question, like Dennis Dodd brought up, you know who the top three are probably going to be. Who's number 4? Who do you think as you sit here right now, we can have before the season starts, who's your number 4?
Right now,
I know everybody goes,
everything could change September 3rd if this team goes into the SEC country and loses. But right now, despite all those losses on defense, I'd take Utah over most programs. I mean, that's a physical program. Ohio State has all the talent and speed in the world, and Utah was able to kind of slow it down for a little while just because of how physical. Like, you have to really be on your stuff, Tim, to be able to take on that team for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Can Florida do that in week 1? I don't know. That team ran Oregon off the field twice last year in 3 weeks. So I'm just not sure who it's going to be that takes Utah down in the Pac-12. And then you're looking at 12-0, 13-0. And then in a playoff game, who's tougher? Utah doesn't get out tough very often. So it's just going to be interesting to me. Right now, that'd be my number 4 team.
That makes as much sense as anything, man. I mean, it definitely does. I've got big questions about Oklahoma, definitely big questions about Texas, for example. I like I said, if you go to the number 4, I don't see the SEC getting more than 2 teams in, Georgia and Alabama. So, and I see Ohio State basically getting there. I think that's a good pick. It's funny that the Rose Bowl could have been a precursor to the college football playoff of 2022. But hey, Spence, Glue Man, thanks for joining me on the Tim May podcast, man. Let's do this again and often. What do you think?
Tim, I'd love to do this again and often. That sounds like a wonderful idea.
Hey, and until next week, we're going to be previewing at the season opener and also look back at 2002, the improbable national championship season. And I'm not saying it came out of nowhere, but it did come out of left field, in my opinion. Going to have a special guest on to talk about that. But ladies and gentlemen, for Spencer Holbrook, Glue Man, as he's known to me, and me, we'll see you next week.